Yeah, I know. I haven't done a video in a while. I got the Tomb Raider 1 through 3 remaster, so I've been busy um, being terrible at that. You'll also notice I went back to a standard YouTube video format. Because let's face it, doing it Instagram resolutions looks like total shit. So I guess I'll have to figure out how to do a link list bio on Instagram. Sorry, I suck at social media because, you know, silly me, busy trying to improve my craft. Anyway, I want to talk about the topic of cell swelling from training and how it potentially impacts the measurement of muscle growth. Now, whenever I did one of my last videos, I just discussed a paper by Buckner and all that examined the fact that a couple of studies from one particular lab, Schoenfeld, seems to find about double the growth of literally every other lab and every other study. Now, not shockingly, Brad has said that anyone who agrees with that paper is biased and has an agenda, because of course Brad has no bias and no agenda, and prefers ad hominems and dismissals to addressing valid criticism. But one of the points of that paper was that, well, there's a question about why one lab is generating these results that no other lab has seen, and they offered a couple of reasons, being one that maybe Brad has just found the secret sauce, which is them being political. Because unlike here, where I can say it, researchers can't really say, yeah, this guy's full of shit. But that a very real possibility that needs to be addressed is the cell swelling issue. We know that after training that there is an increase in cell swelling. The fact is that ultrasound measurements cannot distinguish that from true muscle growth. Now, the grand majority of studies does the retest of muscle measurement, generally 48 hours after the final training session, and they literally all cite the same paper to defend that. And it's a paper by a Japanese researcher whose name I currently forget, that did 3 sets of bench press, and that was it, and found that yes, swelling had gone away at the 48-hour mark. 3 sets. They were doing 9 a week, but only that last workout seems to count. And it raises the question, one I asked back when Brad's volume study came out, one many other people I know of have asked, what Buckner asked. Is that a safe assumption? Can we assume that the swelling from 3 sets of bench press is going to be the same when you're doing, say, oh, I don't know, 15 sets of quads, chest, and back, as in Brad's study, or 16 sets of lower body as in the Brigatto study? Well, the simple fact is that we can't. That is not a good assumption. Now, don't mishear me. I'm not saying that it's right or it's wrong. And I'm going to be real clear on this video because people love to misrepresent what I'm saying. Because it's easier to use the straw man than to actually listen to the words. Or you're all just a bunch of illiterate cretins, and I'm willing to accept both. I'm not saying that 48 hours is right or wrong. I'm saying that assuming it's correct based on 3 sets of bench and that applies to any fucking volume that's being studied, especially the higher volumes, is not good science. But these are not good scientists. We need the fundamental data on this topic of how long it takes for swelling to go down after different volumes of training, and we don't have that. Without that baseline science being done, it's a guess. And of course, these individuals, who are neither biased nor have an agenda, are guessing in favor of themselves. I'm not saying they're right or wrong. I'm saying we need that data. Which brings me to what I want to talk about today. Now, I commented in a video before that it's always interesting to me what studies do and do not get a lot of press in the fitness industry, because it seems like among a certain group of individuals, certain papers get blasted across social media and others kind of get downplayed or ignored. And I'm sure people would accuse me of the same thing, but I don't give a shit about these 32-set volume studies. People know what I think. It's the studies that they don't like. For example, the one I'm going to talk about today that, to my knowledge, was not discussed. Now, realize that when I say that, I follow 0 fitness people. My Instagram account is totally dog accounts. I don't watch YouTube videos. I don't watch this shit. And here's why. Because whenever they report on studies, and I actually read the studies, What they say the study says and what the study actually says are never the same. Ever. This is why I always use screenshots. This is why I will always give you a link to the full text if it's available. I don't want you to trust me about what a paper says. I will fucking show you word for word what the researchers say. They don't do that. They always seem to misrepresent the data just slightly. Maybe you've seen this in my previous videos, where you've read their hyperbolic Instagram posts, and then I actually put up what the researchers actually said, and they're just never quite the same, are they? It's almost like these people are just subtly misrepresenting the data to fulfill their agenda because they know that most people won't actually go check. Almost. That's when they aren't ignoring papers they don't like. Which brings me to the paper I want to discuss today, which is titled Dorado Marco et al. Different Time Course Recovery of Muscle Edema within the Quadriceps Femoris and Functional Performance after Single versus Multi-Joint Exercises, Biology, Sport, blah, blah, blah. Which is a paper that kind of looks at exactly what the title said. Now, I'm once again going to ask you to listen to the whole video and pay attention to the words, because there's a couple of issues that I'm going to address in detail at the end that I know people are going to take out of context and fucking misrepresent so they can argue with what I'm saying, because people can't seem to address my criticisms or comments directly. So they use lots of strawman arguments. So pay attention to the words, and I'll try to keep them simple. So what this paper wanted to look at was the issue of muscle cell swelling. But specifically, they wanted to look at it relative to different exercises in different muscle groups across time to see when the swelling actually dissipated. So already this is more than the 3-set bench press study. Now, it didn't do volume comparisons. I'll come back to that as well. So here's what they did. They took 14 men that had resistance training experience, but they had not trained for 6 months. It does technically make them untrained in a practical sense, and I've been very open that I don't like studies on untrained individuals, and people are going to accuse me of cherry-picking this one. I'm going to address this issue and why I think it still has potential validity, but that is a limitation. Let me say that again. Even though this was an untrained individuals, that is a limitation of the study, but it also has one potential benefit. Again, I'll come back to that. So they brought him in and they did a couple of familiarization workouts on the exercises to show how they were meant to be done. They also tested 10 rep max in both the exercises that were done and tested a bunch of other shit I'll talk about here. Each subject was their own control. So on one leg, they did 8 sets of 10 unilateral leg press. They took 2 minutes between sets. So reasonable. On the other leg, they did 8 sets of 10 leg extensions, again with a 2-minute rest. The first 3 sets were done at 90% of their tested 10 rep max. So figure that was 1 to 2 reps in reserve, somewhere in that range. It was not failure. Sets 4 through 8 were done at 70% of 10 RM, which 3 to 4 reps were reserved. So not the hardest workout in the world, but still a stimulus. And it's definitely harder than 95% of what I see in my commercial gym on any given day. Now, they tested a bunch of shit, one-legged vertical jump and peak torque, and I don't give a shit about any of that stuff because none of that is relevant to bodybuilders because y'all aren't athletes. What I care about is the measurements of muscle thickness in terms of the edema issue and cell swelling. And there were 2 components to this study, which is why I think it's both interesting and informative. The first is that they measured 2 different muscle groups. And again, in response to 2 different exercises. They measured vastus lateralis, which is the outer quad, which gets you the sweep. And they measured the rectus femoris, which is a knee extensor, but also a hip flexor. It's that bilateral muscle. Both of these are commonly measured in studies. So this is already sort of ecologically insightful. It gives insight into this, like they're measuring muscles that are commonly measured. The second interesting thing they did was they measured at 5 time points, at 1 minute after the final set, and then again at 24, 48, 72, and 96 hours. So what they were trying to do was determine a time course to see when cell swelling occurred, and most importantly, when it went away. Now, this was an acute study. It was a single workout. So what they were really doing was looking at sort of a grid of things, which was 2 different muscles times 2 different exercises to see if there was a difference in either the time course of the individual muscle cell swelling, but also if there's a difference in response to 2 different exercises. So already this is better than that 3-set bench press study, by far. Now, the ultrasound assessor was not blinded, and that is a huge flaw. Brought it up in other papers, I'll bring it up in this paper. That is a huge potential source of bias. And I'm sure Brad will jump on that to dismiss this paper, because as Buckner et al. Also pointed out, the high volume advocates seem to apply different rules of criticism to papers they don't like than to their own. Brad didn't blind the grand majority of his studies. When I brought up the blinding issue, he said, and I quote, "Well, you can trust me. Science!" But Brad is definitely of the different rules for thee than for me. Moving on. Once again, this is a purely acute study. It wasn't a training study. 1 workout, and then do the ultrasound 5 time points to see what was going on over the time course. And again, what's interesting about this is they were measuring 2 different muscles in response to 2 different exercises to see if there might be a different pattern among them. Now, both muscles showed an increase in cell swelling immediately after both exercises. Now, in the following chart, I'm going to show the results, but I'm going to show a very limited amount. And it's not because I'm cherry-picking anything. All I give a shit about is when the swelling goes back to normal. So what I'm going to show is a 2x2 grid to show at what time point for each muscle in response to each exercise, cell swelling went back to normal, which would be basically when it's safe to remeasure in terms of measuring actual muscle growth relative to those other studies. Here you go. So here's what this says. After the leg press, the vastus lateralis, the sweep, was back to normal after 24 hours. After the leg extension, the vastus lateralis was not back to normal till 48 hours. In terms of the rectus femoris, the hip flexor, after the leg press, it wasn't back to normal until 96 hours. But in response to leg extension, it was also back to normal at 48 hours. Does that make sense? I hope so. So that's kind of interesting, because what it showed that was not only did different muscles show a different time course of returning to normal for cell swelling to go away, but it also depended on the exercise that was being done, which once again is a little more nuanced than saying, oh, it's 48 hours because of a study that used 3 sets of bench press, and this applies to all muscles under all conditions for all exercises. Now let me move into some of the comments they made, because there is a little bit about this that seems very strange. And then I'm going to address the point that I need everyone to listen to very carefully so that you're not misunderstanding what I'm saying or what I think this indicates relative to all of the other studies that have been done. So let me kind of generally summarize things again. So after the leg press, the vastus lateralis was back to normal after 24 hours, and the rectus femoris wasn't back to normal until 96 hours. So the rectus femoris took longer to recover in terms of cell swelling from the leg press than the leg extension. And then for the leg extension, vastus lateralis is back at 24 hours and rectus femoris at 48 hours. Now, this suggests that the leg extension is working the vastus lateralis more than the leg press, but that the leg press was somehow hitting the rectus femoris harder than the leg extension. And I put what the fuck in the title or in the card because this seems to go against other data, showing that rectus femoris is not really used very much or trained effectively in compound leg exercises. Because in a squat or in a leg press, as it may be lengthening at the knee, it's shortening at the hip. Whereas you would expect leg extension, where the hip angle is fairly static, to hit the rectus femoris more. So this seems contradictory. And the researchers kind of go out of their way to try to explain why this might be in terms of stretch, and somehow that they figured that the leg press put more stretch on the rectus femoris, although I don't see how that works. If it's shortening at one end and then leg extension since the hip angle was fixed and blah blah blah. And I don't really buy their argument, but it doesn't really, that's kind of not the point. The point is that in this case, yeah, in response to the 2 exercises, 3 of the muscles were back to normal at 48 hours. But the rectus femoris, in response to the leg press, took 96 hours. And inasmuch is that the rectus femoris is frequently measured, this suggests that assuming that it's back to normal at 48 hours, based on a 3-set bench press study, may not be right. Now, keep listening, because here comes the important bit that I need y'all to listen to, because I need to address the untrained component again. Again, pay attention. So I discussed this paper with a buddy of mine, Lorenzo Pancini. He does really good stuff. He's had the same criticisms of Brad's papers as I have, and even though he was very polite about it, Brad blocked him for asking questions because that's what gurus with no intellectual integrity do. And I asked him about this paper, and he brought up the point that, well, the subjects were untrained. And that is a valid point, which is why I brought it up initially, and I'm addressing it again. Because we absolutely know that untrained individuals will show the same training response in terms of hypertrophy or strength to basically anything. Doing comparisons of volumes and intensities and all this other shit in untrained, you always get the same responses, which is why I don't really care that much about studies in untrained from a training standpoint or a growth standpoint. But that's not what this study was examining. But he brought up the point, like, well, we don't know that this data necessarily would apply to trained individuals, because there is data, apparently, that untrained individuals see greater cell swelling for longer than untrained. And I don't disagree with that. If you care about the reason that cell swelling is related to inflammation, and presumably untrained individuals get more stress to the muscle and more inflammation, and so that's why untrained individuals get more swelling and supposed damage and things like that. It's because they're fucking untrained. Now, why did they use untrained? Probably so they could get a more robust response, right? Like, if it's easier to get more cell swelling in untrained, you're far more likely to get a measurable response, and you may get better data from that. And the point I made to him, and the point I'm going to make again now, is this. The untrained status is not a variable, because it applies to both the vastus lateralis and the rectus femoris. So within the context of the study, not within the context of comparing it to other studies, within the context of the study, untrained is untrained, unless you want to make some real hand-waving argument that the vastus lateralis was less well-trained or more well-trained than the rectus femoris, and I think you'd have to dig really far up your ass to do such a thing. I'll leave that to Greg Nuckols to do a 4-hour video discussing why I'm wrong about this. And the reason I bring this up, the individual time points are not what's relevant. I'm not saying that this proves that it takes 96 hours for the rectus femoris to return to normal after the leg press. I'm not. Any more than I'm saying that it proves or demonstrates that it takes the vastus lateralis 24 to 48 hours to come back. The individual time points are not what I'm focusing on, because those may very well be different in trained versus untrained. I acknowledge that. But again, untrained is not a variable. It's going to apply to both muscles. The point of this paper, and the reason that I'm bringing it up, is this. It absolutely points out, again, irrespective of the exact hours, and this is where I want you to pay attention so you don't misrepresent what I'm saying, because some more will be like, Lyle said it takes 96 hours. I'm not saying that. I'm not. So if you say that, you're either mentally defective or a bold-faced liar like Mike Israetel. I'm not saying it takes 96 hours. What I'm saying is that this paper points out that maybe the cell swelling time course issue is a little more nuanced than what we could infer from a set using 3 fucking sets of bench press. Because what it found was that 2 different muscles responded differentially to 2 different exercises. And that was with 8 sets of 10. That's a pretty moderate volume. We still need data on if it varies versus volumes. But we may need individual data on specific muscle groups in response to specific exercises. Because if it turns out that even in trained individuals, that in response to leg press, One muscle takes 48 hours, another takes 72 or 96 or however much it is. You can't assume that 48 hours is enough, or 24, or 72, or 96, or 100. Please listen to my point. The exact time points this study found is not what's relevant. The assumption that all muscle groups response to all exercises show return to normal with swelling at the same exact time point, and that's what we're going to measure based on one set or one study with 3 sets of bench presses, is not valid, and any good scientist would not make this assumption. But we're not talking about good scientists. Let me repeat that. I am not saying that swelling does or does not go down at 24 or 48 or 96 hours. I'm not. What I am saying is that assuming that swelling goes down in X hours in all muscles in response to all exercises at a time point established by one study using 3 sets of bench is wrong. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. We simply do not know. Do not know how I can make that any clearer without barking. And yet I guarantee someone who watches this video will go, Lyle says swelling doesn't go down for 96 hours. And if you do say that after me making this as clear as possible, there are only 2 options. And it's the same 2 options as when Mike Israetel said, I claimed that all people should go to failure for all goals, when I'd said half a dozen times that I'm not recommending that you actually train to failure. Those 2 options are, you are mentally defective, or you're a bold-faced liar, just like Mike Israetel. There are no other options if you misrepresent what I'm saying. See you next time. For the record, I neither read nor respond to comments on YouTube or Instagram because I don't care. Mind you, I don't delete comments I don't like most of the weak-minded babies in this industry either. If you think my content is great and want to tell me how awesome I am, fantastic. If you think I'm a dumb asshole and want to call me names, also fantastic. I don't care either way because I have better things to do. If you have questions that you want me to potentially read and or respond to, or most likely ignore, send them to questions@bodyrecomposition.com. Might get to them, might not. It's part of my charm. Oh yeah, I recently added a playlist to my channel, my buddy Solomon Nelson, who does some fantastic videos taking down the cretins in this industry. I've put the link directly to that playlist in the video comments, and you can also find them however you find playlists. He deserves the exposure. Go check him out.